Good morning. So last night, yesterday afternoon, last night, Dell ran our first test play of Dark Age of Man in almost, I would say, 11 months, 10 and a half months. Justin joined us there. Justin is in our OSR group, basically. He's run a few games here on the channel. Todd's Joth game, we're all in together. Dell, of course, and Jory, Dell's son, is in that game as well, and Jory's played with us quite a few times on the channel as well. I don't know if Jory's run anything for us. Yeah, it may be one of those things we ask him to do at some point, right? Put Jory to the test, running us, right? See if he can handle his dad's craziness, Dell's craziness, right? So, I think I've talked about this before. Quick synopsis. My original game was called Dragon Slayer. It was super simple character design. On the biggest innovation for the game was a simple D12. The biggest idea I had for that game is your reputation would grow. Your character didn't actually really grow much. They would grow a little bit, but everything was kept in a relative scale, so to speak. So, and I had a little world written for the introductory village you start in, and it was a fictional England world. The reality is my inspiration was from the movie Dragon Slayer, and it's one of my favorite fantasy films. The gist of Dragon Slayer for me was this: you don't really know much details about the world. It's just this kind of general medieval Dark Ages world, and we're watching a simple culture go off to to deal with this dragon threat in a kingdom, but we really don't learn a whole lot about the world or the country, etc., etc. So it was loosely inspired by Dragon Slayer, So okay, and we playtest a little bit, and then as Dell and I began to explore the naive narrator concepts, the random seed concepts for GM. So remember, naive narrator is the GM seat. It's where the GM plays the game. It's how the GM plays the game. So if somebody were to say, to sum up what it is, where Dark Age of Man is about, I would say teaching the GM to play the game differently. I think that's the hardest, absolute hardest thing, right? Because again, I said this the other day in a video, that we all put our footprint on a game. If I GM Savage Worlds and I follow the rules exactly, people are going to at least recognize the game. They're going to know that they can trust the rules. They're going to know how the game works. The players at the table will be comfortable knowing that it's legit. But I would put a particular personality to it. I'd put a particular footprint on the game that's mine. That's Jason, right? For good or ill, right? And Scott would put his on Savage Worlds, and Anthony would put his on Savage Worlds, and Ivan would put his on Savage Worlds. It's just the nature of, and that's the wonderful thing about our hobby, is individuals' personalities matter, right? It's all important. It's what makes it so fun to sit with other people. Okay, but the single hardest thing I think to do is to not fall into your habits, right? Is to reteach yourself, or to choose to not fall into the habits that you have, whatever game system that you've loved and that you've spent your life doing. You're going to develop particular habits that make that comfortable for you. So we're talking about a level of comfort as a GM, as a DM, or even a player, right? Okay. So even when I was trying to remind myself, I found those old notes from this notebook, which just boggled my mind. I had notes to myself: Jason, remember, make sure you do this thing. Matter of fact, I can't remember, but I'll read you these notes that I made for myself. And these notes were to prompt me: Jason, remember what we're trying to achieve. Remember what you need to do to be better at this for this style of play. And somewhere in here I jotted down these notes. Because I'd never done this before, and we had kind of done it for the first one. Naive narrator best practice. I said, I underlined, know the world setting, know the NPCs, know the certain truths, okay? I had to go in knowing all of these things. If I already know all of this, then it's easy to be naive about where the game's going. It's easy to be completely naive about what the table is about. So if I know the world setting, I've got all those NPCs at my fingertips. I understand the little town that they're going to be in. I know the conflict between the king and the lord, or whatever, the king and the duke, or whatever. Okay, those things exist. That's what makes the world. We're not making it up as we go. We're not completely ignorant of the whole world, right? Know these things, okay? Always put random seed in context in front of the characters. In context of the characters and the setting. Okay, so if I roll Dragon Attacks Dredgewater, and they're right in the middle of a dice game in the tavern, yeah, context is they hear roars, they hear screams, you know, they just got to go outside to identify what the hell's going on, right? So it's pretty simple. Dragons, you know, invading Dredgewater. That's a simple way to roll that disastrous seed into the session, right? If they choose to sit in the tavern and continue to play dice, eventually the tavern will catch fire, and eventually it'll be razed to the ground within a minute with dice, right? Make sense of the seed. All the seeds are purposely naive. They can be one word, they can be, but they're incomplete sentences, so they're meant to be left so vague that a GM can easily fold it into play by just putting it into context. So make sense of the seed, right? If it says, if we're in the middle of the Sahara Desert and you roll flood, yeah, I mean, you're going to have to find a way to make sense of that. I would change that to sandstorm, or I would change that to a deluge of rain that creates mud. Not really a flood, but maybe this, in a way, this miraculous thunder, this deluge that suddenly hits in the desert. Now we're dealing with mud, but not so much floods, right? So you've got to make sense of that seed. Keep notes, because the results of the seeds become canon, lore, and can come up again, because it's also, like all campaigning, as players do things and they meet a wench, that she becomes a friend of theirs that they can rely on to get inside information about the bandits because she works at a tavern. You got to make a note of that. You know, Sarah, bar wench at the Crown and Glory, she becomes a contact for the party, right? We've done that. All GMs do this stuff, right? They jot this stuff down, and hopefully players at the table remember Sarah's part of the group, and they'll jot down she's an NPC connection now at the tavern, etc. Same concept, but these seeds can really create a chaotic world very quickly, and you need to keep them in context, right? The reality is it's affected the world. I say, you know, use a grounded start but a random seed, right? So, and I did all these for me to remind me not to fall into my old OSR habits, right? Grounded start but a random seed. So they're going to start in Dredgewater, in a place they're supposed to understand and know as characters, whatever role they play in Dredgewater's up to their character design. But a random seed will generally launch the session, right? Okay. Roll random seeds throughout the session. Always keep new information coming in. The game never has a chance to slow down. The players never have a chance, in a way, to kind of get bored and start some chaos. They ultimately are going to be constantly getting information, which allows them to react and respond as characters, in which drives the next event, right? Naturally, organically. And then use the random, I can't read my own handwriting here, monster encounters table to, especially for travel. So again, that's Wandering Monster type thing there. Didn't change much. So that's kind of, you know, what I had to do when I was preparing to run Dell in Modern Age 2061. Dell had never played Modern Age before the 3-dice-6 system. I had invented Denver, post-apocalyptic Denver in 2061. He was going to be a warden / marshal of a district in post-apocalyptic Denver. Ultimately, he was a cop. Again, think Matt Dillon, but instead of an entire state, he had a district in Denver. And therefore, he was going to be very much a free agent as the lawman, but he's going to have to deal with the fact that he's constantly hearing or being asked by either his higher-ups or by the locals to deal with something, right? Some lawbreaker or the bandits or whatever. So we had instant conflict. He's a lawman that every day has to deal with a post-apocalyptic world. So it just allowed, at that point, you know, for him to run. I had to remind myself not to get pigeonholed on something. I had to remind myself not to say, if I introduce an evil bad guy, you know, in the opening scene, which I did, that it doesn't become about going after that evil bad guy. Del decides whether his character wants to prioritize the evil bad guy right now. Meanwhile, random seed comes up that says Jubba knocks on his door, needs help. So bang, 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 Jubba's knocking on the door, and he's going to end up in a conversation with a citizen who needs help. Right? That's going to send him, hopefully, if he's doing his job, on a certain path. While meanwhile, Del's thinking about that evil son of a gun that he just had a nightmare about from his past, right? And so Del can make it about going after that guy. Meanwhile, the world exists around him. How many of us say, we got to get to work? I got to be at work in 25 minutes, but my car, can't get my car started. It just threw me a curveball. My goal is to get to work, but I got to get the car started. And then on my way, again, naively as a person driving to work, I get a flat tire. Wow, now I'm doing that. I'm a curveball. Curveball is some jackass runs into somebody, and now I'm a witness to an accident. And I got to stop, get out of the car. By the time I've made it to work, which had been the plan, simple goal, get to work. That was the railroad. That was the path. All this crapola happened, and I don't get to work until it's 10:30 in the morning, right? And now I'm way behind schedule. Okay. That's what it's like to be a human being, a naive human being, a naive character, naive to what's coming. So we're also asking the GM to do the same. Be naive about where it's going. Don't know that this is about going to kill the dragon. This is about going to steal the gold from the bank. This is going to be a heist game. Everybody knows it. We all join up. We all agree we're going to do the heist. That's a different kind of gaming, right? We all have agreed we're going to have characters, and the goal tonight is a bank heist. And we're going to pull it off with these designed characters and this kind of goal. Bob now can't say, I'm not going there, man. I think I'm going to go rob the convenience store. Wow. Everybody's kind of agreed you're going to rob a bank. It's a whole different kind of gaming, right? So what did we learn last night? So we made the transition to the D20 to give us a broader range of numbers for modifiers. Del has since in the last 10 months, and I agree, by the way, that the D12 is a more interesting. It creates a more greater swings in the modifiers, of course, because 5% versus 8.3333% or whatever, right? So very cool. I'm okay with that. So we were doing this to also adjust how do the numbers look, or at least adjust what is our difficulty scale now going to look like. Do we go beyond 12? Do we go up to 15, 17, 19? Is 9 impossible? 19 is 9 impossible? 15? We've got to adjust that as these math numbers impact the dice, right? So I think that's all pretty simple. That's just also number crunching and imagining the worst possible scenario. So last night I present the worst possible scenario. The highest level player in the game, max, could have a +10 combat rating. So they can only fail a combat roll on a 1 or a 2, right? 1 is automatic failure no matter what. So for sure we know they're going to fail on a 1. If the difficulty level is 12 on the D12, even on a 10, they're going to get +10. Even on a 2 on a +10, they're going to get 12. So that means we have to have a 13, we have to have a 14, we have to have a 15, something like that, right? So we have to shift how the D12 and how many numbers are going to exist that make it really truly difficult for low-level characters. That's all traditional game design, traditional mechanical dilemmas when you use this kind of system, right? Okay, but more importantly, same issue we had when I started writing the rule book a couple of years ago. I don't want to write rules. I want to write rules on how to mechanically effectively play our game right. I can't write rules on how to GM differently necessarily. Let's put it this way, I'm not going to try. I'm not going to somehow try. We present how the game's supposed to function. You write how you roll a random seed table and how you should present it. Whether players and the referee of the game, the presenter of the game, bothers to follow those things, once the game's in the hands of the human being, they do what they're going to do with it, and they're going to have the experience that they ultimately create. The players will have the experience ultimately the presenter or GM referee creates. I have played brilliant Dungeons & Dragons D20 old school games with remarkable GMs, and I've played horrendous games. I've had horrible experiences with D20 Dungeons & Dragons, right? It is almost solely dependent on the quality of your DM, right? Or your GM. And of course, other guys at the table can cause disastrous effects. If a game is first and foremost couched in being avatars in a combat simulator, then we're role playing we're role playing after the fact, right? And if I'm playing a character in which being the character is paramount to the things that we're going to embrace in the fiction, like I say, I have yet to play Call of Cthulhu, but I would imagine like a Call of Cthulhu game where my character, his stat block ultimately is to support me as the character then embracing the events that he's given in the world as he investigates supernatural problems or crimes or whatever it is he does. Again, for me, I see that as a character front game, right? The character is ultimately the best pathway for the player to engage with the fiction, versus Pathfinder. The character becomes it just becomes your variables to assault other variables, right? Whether I choose to be a grumpy dwarf or I choose to be a gay halfling, whatever the case may be. And when I say gay, I mean cheerful, or I guess you could be obviously homosexual. But the gist of what I mean is that's just a personality kind of avatar. Again, third on the list at those games, right? It's first the engine of the game, second your character and how it affects the engine of the game, and then you get to play your character, right? So how do we not only allow the player agency, but we at the same time put a GM in a situation where they're okay being naive and they're okay being a player? Because ultimately when I roll the dice to put a seat in front of the players, I really don't roll dice outside of that. I'm never rolling the d12 against them. I only roll and present the world to them, and then. But I get the joy of seeing. For me, the challenge is how do I fold this into the current dilemma they're having? How do I put this in front of them that's interesting? It becomes I spend my energy on making this live organic world make sense as the players run smack dab into it. And I'm not certain it can be taught. I'm not certain it can be. It's like saying. I can educate you on sympathy. I can explain to you what sympathy means. We can get the dictionary, and then I can tell you what it means to be sympathetic, right? And we can go through all those machinations of understanding sympathy. I cannot make a human being sympathetic. I cannot make a human being actually, right? So we're talking about, in a way, intuition, or right? I can't make somebody sane, right? I can define sanity. I can define, but you can't necessarily make someone sane by just defining it for them, right? So this is the dilemma of writing a rule book. We write the rule book, explain the procedures and how you're going to do these things, and then hopefully they have the experience that we want them to have. If I don't play 2D20 Star Trek the way it's intended to be played, I'm not going to have the experience that the authors intend me to have, right? I may not like that experience. I may dread going into that experience if I'm looking at the rules and it looks crunchy and it looks complicated. I may already go into the game dreading it. If it's done properly, I may still hate it. I may not like it. It doesn't, that's just a matter of taste. That's a matter of what you like to do. Who's running it and how they're running it and how they're utilizing those rules, how much challenges they're putting in front of you, whether they pay any attention to your character versus your character sheet, whether the people at the table pay any attention to your Spock versus a character sheet of a Spock's numbers, right? That stuff's all just a matter of culture of play and who you play with and what you're about, and whether any of that ultimately matters in your enjoyment of the process. It helps when you pick a genre that people know the genre. We all have talked about genre, right? Genre, system, those things matter. Culture of play matters, right? Who you play with, I always have said, is more important than what you play. However, what you play very often puts in front of you the kind of people you may or may not like to play with. So when someone tells me, dude, I go to those Pathfinder Society things, I hate that game, Pathfinder sucks, and I say, and I'm playing with these three guys that are jackasses, I say, yeah, and they're drawn to that type of game. So if you don't like those people, maybe you want to avoid that type of game because those types of people are picking that type of game, right? And vice versa, right? I'm not picking on Pathfinder people. I'm making a point. If you hate wargaming people, I mean, if you don't get along with guys that play serious war games, you might want to think maybe wargaming isn't for you, right? So it's not the it's not the people, it's their personalities that are suited to that thing, right? And you might want to reevaluate whether you're actually a war gamer. And that's hard to define, because I say, hey, I love old school D20, I love old D&D, I love D&D Molde, I love, again, much of that just goes back to the nostalgia, right? But there's a certain feel for how that functions, right? Whether I get to be IC all the time, or whether I'm living it out in my head because nobody at the table cares that my character sees the world a particular way, and why should they, right? Because people are ultimately egocentric. They're ultimately worried about themselves, as am I. So I don't expect them to, they're concerned about the gist of the game, the goal of the game, which is to survive the dungeon, get the treasure, level up, and have fun, right? So it just depends on the nature of what you're doing. So how do we put that in a rulebook? All right, how we play testing this? And as I said last night to Dell, how the game started, irrelevant to me. I enjoyed the game. I enjoyed the whole process of the game last night. I was there for one reason, to get my feet wet again. I hadn't played in 11 months, but mostly to analyze the D12 and to see how the D12 was going to shift success and failure in the game, and how Dell might apply that difficulty factors. So Dell never tells us what the difficulty factor is. He doesn't use the terminology like this is nigh impossible. Dell doesn't use our actual rulebook. So in the rulebook we have it, again, here's an example. Dell is a co-author who isn't following our rulebook, but I'm not necessarily either. So in that sense, I'm not certain where our numbers are at. So because he keeps that invisible, he keeps that to himself. So we're just making a roll, adding our number to it. Make a combat roll, and we roll the die, right? All that's, but we're kind of ignorant to what the process is, and that's fine. We don't have to not be ignorant to it. But it's a very interesting thing when you're playtesting. What kind of numbers are we looking at? What is the D12 really looking like here? There were times last night, if I had been presenter of that game, and I know we're facing, in a way, a mass minion combat against peasants in Dredgewater, and Ripa, the Viking, is doing what he's doing. There would have been times with his +4 combat rating that I would not even asked him to roll the die. They would have been automatic hits, automatic kills, because he's basically a +4. Depends on the magnitude of the difficulty scale, right? Which only Dell knows, right? Dell, as the presenter, knows this is a 9, so he's going to have to make a roll. But if we're just looking at the peasants in the rule book, I think their difficulty score is maybe it's a 6, an 8. I can't remember. I haven't looked at our rule book, but let's say peasants in our book is a 3 CR. He hits him with his combat rating without even rolling the dice, right? If that makes sense. Again, I'm not certain. If it's mass, and he's using just a mass difficulty scale, if he's adjusting that difficulty scale based on what we say, which is you're free to do, that's there's an ebb and flow to the difficulty. There's an ebb and flow to based on our results, based on our narrative actions. I make it harder by fighting 2 guys at once. I can make it deadly by fighting 1 guy and ignoring the other guy, right? We talked about all that last night in our post game. And this matters. The presenter says, you turn your back on somebody, you're going to pay the price if you fail this die roll, right? You're going to probably pay a price if you succeed at the die roll, because you're exposing your back when I've told you you're up against 2 people, right? Because he purposely exposed his back, versus my character, who dealt with both. Shield here, weapon here, right? So my character actually acknowledged that I was outnumbered. Justin chose to focus all of his efforts against 1 at a time, which is, again, not a bad strategy, because you want to quickly eliminate a guy so you can even the odds, right? Okay, and I would argue it worked great for Justin's character, as my character ended up face down in the mud, almost dead, right? So very cool, and those results are all dictated by a narration, and the results of the dice, success or failure, dictated why my guy ended up face down in the mud, almost dead, and why his character at some point was in a bloodlust wading through these peasants, right? It was exactly what you anticipate when you play to find out, and the emergent play, emergent story, emergent narrative that comes out of that. So anyway, how do you write all that? Nah, I don't, again, I think I made a video a couple of years ago where I said I don't think you try to write all that. You don't try to reteach or to teach some new kind of. You want to give tools to a player that's going to be the presenter, so he can use those tools to help him do the thing the easiest way, the best practices, right? Like I wrote a cheat sheet to myself in this book, a cheat sheet of best practices to give me guidance that I wouldn't just fall back into the same old way I always have GM'd D&D or DM'd whatever, right? Okay. And it helped me. Then as I got more comfortable with it and it became second nature to me, then it becomes almost harder to teach because now it's almost intuitive. How do I put this into words? How do I actually quantify this in a rule book? Because it's almost so natural for me now. It's even more difficult to quantify, right? We are not dealing with a math problem, right? We write that math problem on the board and then we go to work trying to solve it, right? We're not dealing with that. It's the math problem never changes. We're dealing with how do we solve the math problem. It's more art than science, right? Is what we seem to see. I would argue Pathfinder is science. The OSR, I would say simple OSR games that have very little rules are art, right? Sword and Wizardry Light is art. It's kind of so simple. Rules are stripped away that we are going to encounter a completely different style, probably a fast-paced, fun beer and pretzels if you want to use that kind of gaming versus the very tactical, crunchy reality of what Pathfinder is. And I mean the original Pathfinder. I don't know anything about Pathfinder 2. And then, of course, what 5e, I think, becomes as you get into higher levels. It becomes very much math-oriented stuff, right? You're factoring 6 die. I'm gonna get to shoot off my magic missile like a bazooka, and it's gonna get 8 times 8 dice at this level, and you're gonna multiply it by this if I do this first, and it becomes something else, right? It becomes, I suppose, World of Warcraft, where guys are factoring out, and they're spamming one attack on the boss while somebody else is spamming healing to the party, and I have zero interest in that, right? I have an interest in people being in crazy situations, or elves in crazy situations, or soldiers in crazy situations. What do human beings do? What do these creatures do in these situations, these extreme situations? Who are these people? How do they resolve these issues? How do they evolve as people? How do they become tragic? They have tragic consequences of their own personality disorders, their own personality quirks, right? The guy who swears he will always sleep with his gun under his pillow, right? It's his motto. I always sleep. And the one night that he happens to somehow forget where he's at and is seduced by a hooker and forgets to put his gun under the pillow, and they kick his door in, and we as an audience can all see he broke his own rule. The guy broke his own rule, and his gun is not under his pillow, and now the one time he needs his gun that had been under his pillow for 25 years isn't there now, and he's going to be shot to death, right? Or drug off and beaten and tortured by the mob, and because he forgot to put his gun under his pillow, right? Those are the tragic consequences of a character who lives by these rules, and the tragedy is when he lets his guard down, doesn't live by his own rules, ends up tragically in a bad way. So I think this can happen live in role-playing gaming, and I say it has to be live because what we're trying to really avoid in gaming, in my opinion, it's not railroading, it's contrivance. I don't want players contriving how they're going to get to level 8 and cast Magic Missile. I don't want them planning the future of level 8 Merlin and what he's going to be doing to dragons then 3 months down the road. I want him focused on being Merlin right here, right now. The contrivance of the GM saying, okay, we got 6 hours tonight. By the time we get to the 5th hour, they've got to be in the dungeon room facing the dragon, or we're not going to get this done. That's contrivance. You're prepared to do whatever it takes to get them in the final hour of the game to the dungeon room. Again, you might as well watch a movie or play a video game, right? So these are the things I'm trying to avoid is contrivance. Players conniving and contriving a scenario that's cool or works for them, and a GM that's ultimately trying to control or manipulate the outcome of what we're supposed to achieve, what we're supposed to see in his story or his or her story or her dungeon or whatever. Anyway, I last night was effective because we learned a couple of things. One, I think the D12, we're going to have a math problem if we don't define in the rules what the top challenge is, because players also need to know at first, and as an entry level character, they need to be able to quickly recognize what's way over their head, right? I think they need to also recognize at what point they are no longer challenged, right? That there's nothing in the world that can challenge them. They're godlike, and of course we're designing a kind of a gritty, low fantasy pseudo historic game where I don't want to see any godlike characters, right? No matter how powerful, no matter who you are, you can be brought down, right? You can be brought down through political intrigue, you can be brought down through disease, you can be brought down through assassination. So if you happen to be the King of England, you could still succumb to these things. You're not a god, right? And the weight of you is heavy in the world, but you're not immortal. You're not, you are ultimately still under the same threat that all human beings are, surviving, right? And so that's kind of the goal there. But we learned also with naive narrator, it's best if you start the game off with a simple set the scene, and then hot potato the narrative space to one of the players, so that one of the players then can kind of take off driving the direction, and that'll cue other players, and that'll cue the DM, and the DM will then roll his random seeds, and he'll present new information as the players move. As I storm toward the village with a torch in one hand and an axe in the other, and I'm chasing down civilians, and I'm going to throw my torch onto the first thatched roof. The GM's going to cue, okay, we got to check to see if you encounter that peasant, and if you can get the torch onto the roof to cause a fire. And it might be a simple die roll to verify my narrative pace, and then that cues the other players that, oh, he's gone, he's running into the village, he's fighting civilians, and he's torching a building. I'm going to do the same. And Joe says, I'm going to go to the left of him, and I'm going to look for any people that look like they're dangerous to us, that are armed, and soldiers, and then the GM goes from there, and then he rolls a random seed that says a deluge begins. And then he starts to describe how it begins. Suddenly it's raining, and it's raining very heavy, and that's going to impact the play. And we just go. We're just going. So we did learn last night that I felt bad because Dell kind of painted himself into a corner with these NPCs that were ultimately in charge of us, which is, again, totally accurate historically, totally accurate based on our level. But it slowed the process of him kind of getting that hot potato into our hands, so things could take off, right? And they will. The players, I trust players are more imaginative than we think. I think they've been hindered by particular GMs. They've been hindered by particular game systems. So players wait. They listen to what they're told by a DM that tells them everything, and then they wait to be asked what they want to do and roll the dice. That's the majority of what players have to sit through. And a lot of players want that. They want to be entertained, and then they want to partake in the game part, and then they want to be entertained, they want to partake in the game part. Maybe that's what they want. But I do believe players will relax and exercise some freedom if the system supports it, right? And DMs, I think, do what they ultimately think is entertaining. They provide this world and the details of this world, sometimes effectively, sometimes ineffectively, and ultimately to put the players in a situation to be faced with obstacles like traps and monsters and whatever the case may be, right? It's the nature of the birth of our hobby, and how that was perceived, and how that's been taught, and how other people have learned how to GM. I would like to know this. I was the first guy to buy D&D books as a kid. I was the first guy to read the D&D books. Actually, I didn't buy it. I found my brother's Holmes on his shelf and dug it out at 8 and went, what the hell is this? This looks pretty cool. This is amazing. It's got a dragon on the cover. By the time I was 10, I was the guy reading the books. I was the one guy running the games. Nobody taught me. I can't even trust that I remember whether I really read the books well enough to know how you DM. So the bad habits I would have been learning and doing then, I had to either unlearn or I never unlearned, right? And I'm still doing them. I don't know, but I think I've unlearned a lot of bad habits by playing with other DMs and say, I don't like the way he does that. Ooh, damn, I do that, right? I learned an amazing thing that happened for me is a chance to play OSR as a player in Lamentations with Ivan. One of the single greatest experiences I've ever had, but the frustration I had with not GM Fiat so much as roll that die 6, don't roll a 1. And I remember at times being so frustrated that that die 6 became this thing, that Ivan used for many of the responses to what I wanted to do as Jurgen. And then it dawned on me in playing my basic fantasy campaigns, like 2 weeks later, I'm running basic fantasy, I'm doing the same thing. And I'm like, holy shit, this thing frustrated me with Ivan, and yet it's what I do. Didn't realize we're doing the same thing, right? But I had never been a player to realize how frustrating that is for the GM just to arbitrarily say, well, roll a die 6, we'll see what happens. It's cool, actually. It's great fun. We can't control it. But at the same time, there's a level of frustration I had never had a chance to experience until I was in that game, right? Didn't make the game bad. Didn't ruin the game for me. It was brilliant. It was fantastic. But every time, in the back of my head, I'd go, fuck that. I hate that die. I'm fed up with that dice. Whatever it was, right? So, and I'm probably not remembering that totally accurately. It's been years. It's been like 4 years since that game, so I can't remember exactly how many times I actually had to roll a d6. But I remember every time it was asked of me, or of Lee, or of Josh, I would go, mm. And the irony is, it's really great fun, but I didn't know what it was like to be a player in that situation, and so it's the only way you can learn. I get now why players think the GMs, got this kind of arbitrary control of the game, right? Which we do, especially in old school. When a player says, is there a candle in here? I can take complete fiat and say no, and that's, the player will accept that information. They're asking because they just want to know yes or no. I can say no, and the player will go, right? Or I can say yes, and the player will say, well, I need that candle, I'm going to grab it up. Or I can say roll a d6, and we'll see, right? So it's all going to ultimately lead to yes or no answer, right? But it depends on how you want to go about acquiring that data, right? Play to find out, right? So pretty cool. All right.